My father had been gone for 2 days when my mother slid the papers across the dining room table, her face a mask of cold resolve. "Sign it, Paige." Her voice was clipped. Beside her, my sister Tara smirked, her influencer gloss hiding a smug satisfaction. They wanted me to sign away my inheritance, our childhood home, the home my father built with his own 2 hands, now mortgaged to pay for Tara's designer bags and sponsored vacations. At 27, my name is Paige Ramsey, and I was about to learn that grief was the opening act for betrayal. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had to fight for more than just scraps from your own family, hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you're going to want to hear what happens next. The wind off the Oregon coast bit at my knuckles as I hauled my suitcase up the cracked steps of my childhood home in Astoria. The air smelled of salt and damp wood, the same as it always had, but the house looked smaller somehow, its gray paint peeling like old skin. I hadn't been back in 3 years, not since I moved to Portland for my apprenticeship. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and there was Mom, Cynthia Holloway, standing in the foyer, her arms crossed, her blonde hair sprayed into a perfect helmet. "Paige," she said, her eyes flicking over my wool coat, "that thing makes you look like a lumberjack. Couldn't you have worn something nicer?" Her voice was sharp, like she was scolding a child. Before I could answer, she turned her head. "Tara, your sister's here." My sister, Tara, floated down the stairs, her phone in one hand, her nails painted coral. She was all legs and gloss, an Instagram influencer with a lifestyle blog that Mom treated like a Pulitzer Prize. "Hey Paige," she said, barely glancing up. "You cut your hair? Bold." I touched the ends of my bob self-consciously. "Thanks," I muttered, but she was already scrolling again. I set my suitcase by the door, the wheels squeaking, and caught a glimpse of Dad in the corner of the living room. Frank Ramsey, my father, was hunched over a table saw, sanding a piece of wood. His flannel shirt was frayed at the cuffs, and his hands moved with the slow, deliberate care of a man who'd spent his life fixing things. He looked up, his gray eyes meeting mine, and gave me a small nod. It was enough, it always had been. Dinner was a performance. Mom praised Tara's latest sponsored post, a candle that smelled like ocean dreams, while I pushed peas around my plate. "Paige, you should try some of Tara's tips," Mom said, cutting her chicken. "She's got 500,000 followers now, imagine that." I nodded, my throat tight. Dad reached for the salt, his calloused fingers brushing mine, and I felt a flicker of warmth. Later, as I washed dishes, I overheard Mom on the phone in the next room. "It's about options, Tara," she said, her voice low. "This is our last chance to get it right." I froze, the sponge dripping in my hand. What options? What chance? I glanced at Dad, who was wiping down the table, his face unreadable. He caught my eye and smiled, just a little, like he knew something I didn't. That night, I lay in my old twin bed, the springs creaking under me. The room smelled of mildew and memory. I thought of the art contest I'd won in high school, the one Mom had dismissed as cute. Dad had taken my sketch, a lighthouse against a stormy sky, and framed it in his workshop. He hung it above his workbench, where no one but us would see it. I could still picture his hands, steady and sure, driving the nails into the wall. The memory stung, sharp and sweet, and I turned my face into the pillow, trying to quiet the ache in my chest. The call came at dawn, a nurse's voice cutting through the fog of sleep. "Your father's had a fall?" she said. "He's at the hospital." I scrambled out of bed, my socks slipping on the hardwood floor, and threw on jeans and a sweater. Mom was in the kitchen, sipping coffee, her robe pristine. "He'll be fine," she said, waving a hand. "Old people fall." Tara was still asleep, her door closed, her life untouched. I drove Dad's old pickup to the hospital, the engine rattling like loose change. The waiting room smelled of bleach and stale coffee, and I sat there, twisting my scarf in my hands until they let me see him. Dad lay in a bed, his hip bruised and swollen, his face pale but calm. "Sorry to scare you, kid," he said, his voice rough. I squeezed his hand, my eyes burning. "Just don't do it again," I whispered. Mom and Tara showed up an hour later, Mom in heels, Tara in leggings and a hoodie. "This is such a hassle," Tara muttered, checking her phone. Mom nodded, her lips pursed. "We'll need to rearrange some things." I stared at them, my chest tight. Rearrange what? Dad's life? Their schedules? I turned away, focusing on the beep of the monitor, the rise and fall of Dad's chest. A man in scrubs approached, his name tag reading David Reyes, PT. He was maybe 30, with dark eyes and a quiet smile. "You're Frank's daughter?" he asked. I nodded, surprised by the warmth in his voice. "You okay?" he added, softer. I blinked, caught off guard. No one else had asked. "I'm fine," I lied, but his gaze lingered like he saw through me. Back home I found Mom on the phone again, her voice hushed. "It's about the power of attorney," she said. "We need to move fast." My stomach twisted. Power of attorney? For what? I thought of Dad in that hospital bed, his hand warm in mine, and felt a surge of protectiveness. I slipped outside, the air cooled against my face, and sat on the porch steps. The fog was thick, swallowing the streetlights, and I hugged my knees, feeling like a ghost in my own family. That night, I called my boss and requested a leave of absence. "Take as long as you need," he said, but I heard the strain in his voice. I hung up, my hands shaking, and looked at Dad's workshop across the yard. The light was off, the door locked. I wanted to go in, to touch the tools he loved, but I didn't have the key. Instead, I pressed my forehead to the window, the glass cold against my skin, and let the tears come. Days blurred into weeks, each one heavier than the last. I moved into Dad's guest room, my life in Portland on hold. Every morning, I drove him to physical therapy, helped him with his exercises, and cooked meals he barely ate. Mom and Tara drifted in and out, their presence like a radio tuned to static. "You're so good at this, Paige," Mom said once, her tone dismissive like I was a hired nurse. Tara just posted selfies from the hospital lobby, captioning them family David became my lifeline. He'd linger after Dad's sessions, asking about my day, my work. One afternoon, as we sat in the hospital cafeteria, he handed me a coffee. "You look like you need this," he said, his smile soft. I took it, my fingers brushing his, and felt a warmth I hadn't known I was missing. "Thanks," I said, my voice small. He told me about his job, how he coordinated palliative care, how he believed in making people's last days matter. I listened, my heart aching, wondering if Dad's days were numbered. Mom cornered me one evening, a stack of papers in her hand. "These are for insurance," she said, her eyes avoiding mine. "Just sign them." The forms were dense, legal jargon swimming on the page. I hesitated, my pen hovering. "Can I read them first?" I asked. Her face tightened. "Don't make this complicated, Paige." I set the pen down, my pulse racing, and said I'd look them over later. She huffed and walked away, her heels clicking. Late that night, I found a pile of mail on the kitchen counter, half hidden under a magazine. Credit card bills, all in Tara's name, with balances that made my stomach drop, thousands of dollars overdue. I sank into a chair, the papers trembling in my hands. How had it gotten this bad? And why was Mom so calm about it? I thought of Dad, his quiet strength, and wished he were here to tell me what to do. The next morning, Dad was stronger, his grip firmer as I helped him walk. "You're doing good, kid," he said, his voice steady. I smiled, but the weight of those bills, Mom's secrets, and the unsigned papers pressed against my chest. I drove home in silence, the fog thicker than ever, and parked in the driveway. For a moment I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, feeling the world slip out from under me. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and hope that spring morning. Dad was sitting up, his hands folded over the blanket, his eyes brighter than they'd been in weeks. I adjusted the pillow behind him, my fingers brushing the rough cotton, and he caught my wrist gently. "You're wearing yourself thin, Paige," he said, his voice low, like the hum of his old truck. I shrugged, forcing a smile, but he didn't let go. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his hospital gown and pulled out a small tarnished key, its edges worn smooth. He pressed it into my palm, closing my fingers around it. "This is for you," he said. "When you need a fresh start, don't let anyone tell you you're not enough." The diagnosis came like a thunderclap. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Dad's doctor sat us down in a small, sterile room, her voice calm but heavy. "Weeks, maybe months," she said. I gripped the arms of the chair, my nails digging into the plastic, while Mom nodded like she was hearing a weather report. Tara stared at her phone, her face blank. I wanted to scream, to shake them, but I just held Dad's hand, his skin cool and papery. He squeezed back, weak but there, and I swallowed the sob clawing at my throat. Those final weeks were a blur of hospital visits and quiet moments. I read to Dad from his favorite westerns, my voice steady even when my hands shook. He'd smile, his eyes half closed, and murmur, "Good job, kid," I memorized the lines of his face, the way his stubble caught the light, knowing I'd lose him soon. Mom and Tara were ghosts drifting in for brief visits, their perfume lingering like a taunt. I didn't care. All that mattered was Dad, the way he'd hum old country songs when he thought I wasn't listening. He slipped away on a rainy Tuesday, the machines beeping softly as his breathing stopped. I sat by his bed, my face pressed to his hand until the nurse gently pulled me away. The world felt hollow, like a house with no foundation. At the funeral, Mom wore a black dress that screamed money, and Tara posted a tearful selfie with a caption about cherishing family. I stood by the grave, the rain soaking my coat, and felt like I was drowning. 2 days later, Mom called me into the dining room. Tara was there, her arms crossed, a stack of papers on the table. "We need to talk about the house," Mom said, her voice clipped. "It's been mortgaged to cover Tara's debts. You need to sign this waiver of inheritance so we can sell it." I stared at the papers, my heart pounding. The house, Dad's house, with his workshop, his framed sketch of my lighthouse, was drowning in Tara's overspending. "You knew?" I asked, my voice shaking. Mom's eyes narrowed. "Don't be dramatic, Paige. It's just business." Tara chimed in, her voice smug. "Besides, you're moving on, right? With David? You don't need this place." I stood there, the room spinning, betrayal cutting deeper than grief. They'd used Dad's home, his sanctuary, to bail out Tara's influencer dreams. I thought of his key, still in my pocket, and felt a spark of defiance. "I need time," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, and walked out, their voices rising behind me. Outside the fog was thick, but I kept walking, the key a small, hard truth against my hip. The dining room was a battlefield the next morning. Mom stood by the table. The waiver papers fanned out like a deck of cards. Tara leaned against the wall, her phone idle for once, her eyes sharp. "Sign it, Paige," Mom said, her voice cold. "This isn't about you. It's about what's best for the family." I looked at her, at the woman who'd dismissed my art, my life, and now my grief, and felt something snap. Not anger, but clarity, like the fog lifting over the coast. "You don't get it," I said, my voice low but firm. "You never understood him. You never understood me." I picked up the pen, held it for a moment, then set it down, the click loud in the silence. Mom's face twisted, and she let loose a torrent of words, about my ingratitude, my selfishness, how I'd never been enough. Each one stung, but they didn't break me. I thought of Dad's key, his quiet nod, his belief in me, and I stood taller. "I'm done," I said, and walked to my room. I packed a single bag, clothes, my sketchbook, the key. I took the framed lighthouse sketch from Dad's workshop, its edges worn from years of dust and love, and tucked it under my arm. Mom and Tara were still in the dining room, their voices a dull hum, but I didn't look back. I stepped outside, the air sharp with salt, and felt the weight of the house lift. For the first time I was free, not just from them, but from the need to prove myself. I drove to David's apartment, the sketch on the passenger seat, the key in my pocket. When he opened the door, his face softened and he pulled me into a hug without a word. I leaned into him, the warmth of his arms a shelter, and let myself breathe. The road ahead was uncertain, but I had Dad's key, his love, and the strength to keep going. I was enough. 4 months later, I was living with David in a small apartment on the edge of Astoria, the kind of place with creaky floors and windows that rattled in the wind. It wasn't much, but it was ours, filled with second-hand furniture and the smell of coffee every morning. I'd gone back to work, sketching blueprints for a community center, my pencils scratching late into the night. The grief for Dad was still there, a quiet ache, but it didn't swallow me anymore. I carried it like a stone smoothed by the tide, heavy but bearable. The key Dad gave me sat on my nightstand, catching the light each morning. I hadn't figured out what it unlocked, but I held on to it, a talisman of his faith in me. One rainy afternoon, David found me staring at it, my sketchbook open to a half-finished lighthouse. "You ever gonna open that mystery box?" he asked, his voice gentle. I laughed, a sound that felt foreign but good. "Maybe today," I said, and he squeezed my shoulder, his warmth steadying me. We drove to Dad's old storage unit, a rusty shed on the outskirts of town. The key fit the lock perfectly, the bolt clicking open with a soft groan. Inside was a metal box no bigger than a bread loaf, its surface scratched, but solid. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid, the hinges creaking. Inside I found a folded piece of paper, a stack of stock certificates, and a thin envelope with my name in Dad's blocky handwriting. I opened the paper first, a deed to the house, the original, untainted by Mom's mortgages. The certificates were for a small shipping company, worth enough to change everything. The envelope held a handwritten will dated a year before Dad's fall. To Paige it read, "Because you've always been enough. Keep building, kid. Love, Dad." I sank to the floor, the papers clutched to my chest, and cried. Not from pain, but from the weight of his love. David knelt beside me, his hand on my back, and I leaned into him, the tears soaking my sleeve. Dad had seen me, protected me, even when I couldn't see it myself. This was his legacy, not the house or the money, but the belief he'd poured into me, quiet and unshakable. Later, at a diner over greasy burgers, I told David everything. "What are you gonna do?" he asked, stealing a fry from my plate. I traced the edge of the table, thinking of Mom and Tara, their debts, their schemes. A neighbor had mentioned they were tangled in legal trouble, something about the house's sale. I could fight them, claim it all, but the thought felt hollow. "I don't want revenge," I said finally. "I want to honor him." David nodded, his eyes soft, and I knew he understood. That night I sketched again, the lighthouse sharper now, its beam cutting through the fog. The box's contents sat on the table, a promise and a choice. I wasn't the girl who'd come home to Astoria, small and unseen. I was building something new, piece by piece, with Dad's love as my foundation. The letter took me a week to write. I sat at our kitchen table, the morning light slanting through the window, a mug of coffee cooling beside me. The words came slowly, each one deliberate, like laying bricks for a wall I'd never see finished. "Dear Mom and Tara," I began, my pen scratching the paper. I didn't accuse or beg. I offered a deal: sell the house, split the proceeds. Half would go to a palliative care center in Dad's name, to help others like him find peace in their final days. The other half was theirs, to clear their debts, to start over. I didn't want a cent. "All I ask," I wrote, "is the lighthouse sketch. Send it back." I mailed it on a Monday, the envelope heavy in my hand as I dropped it into the blue mailbox. David stood beside me, his arm brushing mine. "You sure?" he asked. I nodded, the wind tugging at my scarf. "It's what Dad would have done." We walked home, the fog thin for once, the ocean glinting in the distance. Weeks passed, and I threw myself into work, my sketches piling up. The community center project was approved, and I spent evenings with David, planning, laughing, building a life that felt like mine. The ache for Dad lingered, but it was softer now, woven into the fabric of who I was. I'd started therapy too, a quiet hour each week to untangle the years of feeling small. It wasn't easy, but it was honest, like Dad's hands on his tools, steady and true. One morning a package arrived, plain brown paper with no return address. I opened it at the table, David pouring coffee behind me. Inside was the lighthouse sketch, its frame scuffed but intact. No note, no explanation, just the drawing, its lines bold against the storm. I traced the glass, my fingers trembling, and felt a wave of peace, not closure, but something better. Freedom. Mom and Tara had sent it back, and that was enough. I didn't need their words or their approval. I had Dad's and I had mine. We hung the sketch in our living room next to a letter Dad had written years ago, one I'd found in the box. A note about fixing a neighbor's fence, mundane but full of his quiet care. David hammered the nail, his hands sure, and I stepped back, the wall glowing in the afternoon light. The lighthouse stood tall, its beam a promise, and I felt whole. Not because the pain was gone, but because I'd chosen to carry it with grace. That evening, I walked to the beach alone, the sand cold under my boots. The ocean stretched wide, its waves steady and endless. I thought of Dad, his nod, his key, his belief that I was enough. I thought of the life I was building, with David, with my work, with the truth of who I was. I smiled, the wind lifting my hair, and let the horizon hold me. I was home. One morning, a package arrived, plain brown paper with no return address. I opened it at the table, David pouring coffee behind me. Inside was the lighthouse sketch, its frame scuffed but intact. No note, no explanation, just the drawing, its lines bold against the storm. I traced the glass, my fingers trembling, and felt a wave of peace. Not closure, but something better. Freedom. Mom and Tara had sent it back, and that was enough. I didn't need their words or their approval. I had Dad's and I had mine. We hung the sketch in our living room next to a letter Dad had written years ago, one I'd found in the box. A note about fixing a neighbor's fence, mundane but full of his quiet care. David hammered the nail, his hands sure, and I stepped back, the wall glowing in the afternoon light. The lighthouse stood tall, its beam a promise, and I felt whole, not because the pain was gone but because I'd chosen to carry it with grace. That evening, I walked to the beach alone, the sand cold under my boots. The ocean stretched wide, its waves steady and endless. I thought of Dad, his nod, his key, his belief that I was enough. I thought of the life I was building with David, with my work, with the truth of who I was. I smiled, the wind lifting my hair, and let the horizon hold me. I was home. I used to think freedom was about winning a fight. Now I know it's about choosing which battles are worth your energy. By letting go of the house, I claimed something far more valuable: my future. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is lay down your weapons and build a new home inside yourself, on your own terms. If you've ever had to build a new beginning from a difficult ending, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I hope you'll subscribe.